Chapter 13. Bobby showered and changed quickly into a green turtleneck sweater and a short, straight black skirt, which she pulled over green tights. She brushed her hair, frowning at herself in a water-spotted locker room mirror. Feeling excited, she made her way out of the room, calling out good night to the few girls who were still there. As she half walked, half jogged back outside to the football team's locker room, she relived that second quarter nightmare, seeing the scene repeat in her mind. There was Chip, frozen in place, and there were the Winstead tacklers swarming over him, and there was Chip out cold on the ground, sprawled so flat, so still, and then there came the stretcher, the worried coach and players forming a tight circle around their fallen quarterback, and then Chip being carried away. Under the bright, too bright stadium lights, Bobby saw his hands dangling limply, lifelessly, over the sides of the stretcher, saw that his eyes were closed, his head tilted at such a strange angle. He's dead, she thought. It was so silent in the stadium, so unearthly silent. We're all dead. All. But then whistles blew. The game resumed. Chasner injured on the play, the stadium announcer informed everyone. Old news already. The voices came back, the cheers and shouts. The band revived, blared out the Tigers' fight song, the tubas punctuating each beat with a raucous blat. Bobby, feeling shaken and stunned, called out the cheers. Somehow, she knew, she had to keep going. But is he okay? She wondered. Is he okay? Winstead scored quickly. The Tigers came back with Overman, Chip's backup. They tried some running plays that didn't work. After 3 plays, they had to punt. Again, Bobby heard scattered boos. The cheerleaders across the field were leaping high, shouting with renewed enthusiasm. Is he okay? Is Chip okay? The game lost all interest for her. She called out cheers, kept the routines going, all on automatic pilot. Word on the bench was that Chip had probably suffered a mild concussion and was feeling fine now. Everyone was very relieved. She saw that he didn't come out for the second half. Did they take him to a hospital? Bobby wondered. Is he still in the locker room? Does he still expect me to meet him? The Tigers lost 21-6. And now here she was, nervously waiting in the student parking lot, in front of the door to the team dressing room. The stadium lights dimmed, then went out, casting the stadium, the parking lot, the entire back of the school into sudden night. As if someone had turned off the sun, Bobby thought. As her eyes adjusted to the new darkness, she saw Deborah and Ronnie heading across the parking lot. Involved in conversation, they didn't notice her. Bobby watched them disappear around the corner, both of them talking animatedly, gesturing with their hands. Strange that Kimmy isn't with them, she thought. Maybe Kimmy had a date. The locker room door swung open. Bobby recognized Dave Johnson, the running back. He came bouncing out, carrying a small knapsack, his hair still wet from the shower. Is Chip, is he in there? Bobby stammered. Yeah, he's coming out, Johnson told her. Is he okay? Bobby asked. But Johnson was already halfway across the rapidly emptying parking lot. Bobby started to shout after him, but the door opened again and Chip appeared. He moved forward unsteadily, smiling at her, his face pale, almost bloodless under the parking lot lights. He was wearing faded jeans and a Shadyside leather jacket that he had snapped up to the collar. Hi, he called. How's it going? His smile was forced, she saw. His eyes weren't quite focusing on her. Are you okay? She blurted out. The question seemed to catch him off guard. I'm not sure, he replied, wrinkling his forehead. He stepped closer to her. What happened? Bobby asked. I was, worried. Me too. She waited for him to say more, but his face fell into a thoughtful, faraway stare. So, what happened? I mean, you're okay? I guess, he said slowly. Maybe a slight concussion. That's what they said. I'm supposed to go right home. I feel kind of funny. Oh. She couldn't hide the disappointment from her voice. I have a car, she said. Can I give you a lift? Yeah, that would be great. My parents are out of town. Actually, I'm glad my mom wasn't at the game. She worries. Do you feel kind of weird? Yeah, he nodded. Kind of. You know, spacey. It looked so scary when you didn't get up, Bobby said, leading the way to her parents' Accord, which was parked around the front of the street. Were you knocked out? I guess. He put a hand on her shoulder as if he needed to steady himself as he walked. She slowed down. He waved to a couple of players from the team. Did it hurt? She asked. No, not really. Am I asking too many questions? She asked. He didn't reply. Wow, this is sure going great, Bobby thought unhappily. I'm asking question after question, and he's staring off into space. He can barely walk or even answer me. They made their way in silence to the car. She unlocked the passenger door and held the door open as he slid into the front seat. A few seconds later, she started up the car and turned on the headlights. I don't know where you live, she said, turning to him, adjusting her shoulder seatbelt. It was like I was dead, he replied. She stared into his eyes. Huh? It was like I was paralyzed or something. I couldn't get my body to move, to do anything. He turned his eyes to the windshield. A group of kids crossed in front of the car. One of them tapped on the hood as he passed. Chip, are you feeling okay? Should I call your parents or something? She asked, feeling a stab of worry in the pit of her stomach. Well, aren't you wondering why I didn't pass the ball, or hand it off? He asked heatedly. Isn't that what everyone wants to know? The doctor said you had a concussion, right? Bobby said, a little frightened. She started to pull away from the curb, but he stopped her, placing his hand over hers. His hand was ice cold. Before I got the concussion, he said more quietly. Before, when I was playing, I wanted to throw the ball, but it was like I had no control, like I was paralyzed or something, just for that moment. I don't understand, Bobby said, shaking her head. Oncoming headlights filled the car with light. Bobby and Chip both shielded their eyes. A car roared by, filled with Shadyside kids, all the windows down, everyone singing along to a blaring radio. I couldn't hand it off either, Chip said. She realized he was explaining it to himself. She wondered if he even cared whether she was in the car. I didn't freeze. I just wasn't there. I mean, I was and I wasn't. I knew where I was, but I couldn't move. Chip? Bobby started, reaching again for the gear shift. They still hadn't moved from the curb. Maybe we'd better? He startled her by turning in the seat, leaning toward her and grabbing her shoulders with both of his hands. Chip? She began. I'm kind of scared, he said, his eyes wild and unfocused, his face closer and closer to hers. You know, I'm really kind of scared. And then he pulled her down to him and started to kiss her. His lips felt hard and dry against hers. His hands held onto her shoulders, pulled her to him. Bobby started to pull away, but he seemed so needy, so frightened. Returning his kiss, she raised her hands to his wrists and removed them from her shoulders. Then she slid her hands around the back of his neck. To her surprise, he was trembling all over. The kiss ended as suddenly as it had begun. Chip, his expression a little embarrassed, leaned back against his seat. Sorry, That's okay, Bobby replied, realizing her heart was pounding. Maybe we'd better get me home, Chip said, avoiding her eyes, staring out the passenger window, which was beginning to steam up. I just feel so weird. Okay. Bobby put the gear shift into drive and pulled away from the curb. As he directed her to his house on Canyon Road, she repeatedly glanced over at him. He seemed to flicker on and off in the light of the passing streetlights, so pale, so ghostly pale and worried-looking. Bobby, what happened to me tonight? He whispered, staring out of the passenger window. Bobby had no reply. Chapter 14. Bobby, can I talk to you? Kimmy came bounding across the gym before practice on Monday afternoon. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes angry. I just got here, Bobby said distractedly, searching the gym. Everyone seems to be ready. Megan and Heather were already working on one of the new routines. Miss Green was standing behind her desk in her office, talking on the phone. Sorry I'm late, Bobby called to the others. I really need to talk to you, Kimmy insisted, hands on her waist. Her black, crimped hair was more disheveled than usual. The sleeves of her sweater were rolled up, one above the elbow, the other below. Bobby waved to Corky. She tossed her backpack against the wall. What about, Kimmy? She asked impatiently. I've had the worst day. First, I forgot about a chemistry quiz, then... About Chip, Kimmy said, through clenched teeth. Bobby's eyes widened in surprise. She could feel her face growing hot. Chip? Well, what about him? You made a little mistake, Bobby, Kimmy said, tapping her sneaker nervously on the gym floor, like a thumping rabbit foot. One hand played with the silver megaphone pendant she always wore around her neck. Huh? Chip is my boyfriend, Kimmy said heatedly. Bobby glanced past Kimmy and saw that the other girls had stopped their practicing and were standing around, staring with unconcealed interest at this unpleasant confrontation. "Could we talk about this after practice?" Bobby asked, gesturing to the audience they had attracted. "No way," Kimmy insisted, fingering the silver pendant. "Chip is my boyfriend. We've been going together for a long time. Ask anyone." She gestured back to the other girls, who shifted uncomfortably and avoided Bobby's eyes. "Kimmy, listen," Bobby said quietly, backing away. "You made a little mistake, Bobby. A little mistake," Kimmy repeated, raising her voice, following Bobby, moving very close to her. Bobby felt herself losing her temper. What right did Kimmy have to do this to her? She was only trying to embarrass Bobby in front of the other cheerleaders. She was only trying to turn the girls against Bobby even more. "You're the one who made the mistake?" Bobby blurted out. "You're forgetting one little detail, Kimmy. I didn't ask Chip out. He asked me." Kimmy's eyes grew wide. Then, uttering a cry of anger, she lunged at Bobby, grabbing the sides of her hair with both hands, pulling hard. Startled, Bobby gasped. She tried to duck out of Kimmy's hold, but Kimmy had a firm grasp on her hair. Bobby yelped in pain and struggled to pull Kimmy's hands off. Suddenly, a voice was calling, "Stop! Girls, stop, please!" And Jennifer wheeled her chair right between the two combatants. "Stop it, please! Kimmy! Bobby!" Both girls stumbled backward. Surprised to see Jennifer appear out of nowhere, they hesitated, panting noisily. Bobby's head throbbed. She raised a hand and tried to smooth her hair. "Girls, what is going on?" Miss Green came trotting out of her office, a look of alarm on her face. "I was on the phone, and when I looked up—" "It's okay," Jennifer told her, backing her wheelchair up, her eyes on Bobby. "A slight disagreement." "Good Lord!" Miss Green cried, staring first at Bobby, then at Kimmy, who had bent down to pick the silver megaphone pendant up off the floor. Embarrassed and upset, Bobby stared at the bleachers at the other end of the gym. Taking in big gulps of air, she struggled to catch her breath. Her throat felt as dry as cotton. Kimmy fiddled with the clasp of the pendant chain, her hands shaking visibly. Her face was crimson, and a damp clump of her hair had fallen over one eye. "I think you two had better apologize to each other right now," Miss Green said sternly, talking to them as if they were 4-year-olds. Neither girl replied. Jennifer backed her wheelchair out of the way. Kimmy fastened the megaphone pendant around her neck, glaring at Bobby as she did it. "This is very bad timing," Miss Green said, crossing her arms in front of her chest, "especially since you two have to work so closely together on the new routine." The new routine. Bobby had forgotten they were going to work on the new routine. She sighed. The new routine was long and difficult, and it ended with Kimmy doing a pike, diving off Corky's shoulders, and being caught by Bobby. "Maybe we should practice something easier today?" Bobby muttered glumly. "We're not practicing anything until you and Kimmy apologize to each other for acting like spoiled babies," Miss Green said, frowning. Bobby glanced past Miss Green at the other girls. Corky was making funny faces at her. Helpful. Very helpful. The other girls all looked terribly uncomfortable. Deborah and Ronnie had gone back to practicing their splits. They were pretending that the little drama wasn't taking place. "There's nothing to apologize about," Kimmy said defiantly. "Nothing to apologize about," Bobby thought, rolling her eyes. "She attacked me." "Well, if you really feel that way," Miss Green said angrily, her arms still crossed, "I'll have no choice but to suspend both of you from the squad." A few of the girls gasped. Ronnie and Deborah stopped their exercises. "Well," Kimmy said slowly, avoiding Bobby's eyes. "I'm willing to apologize," Bobby said softly. "Even though this is entirely Kimmy's fault," she added to herself. "I guess I am too," Kimmy said grudgingly, her blue eyes flashing. "I should hope so," the advisor said, lowering her arms. "After all, this is a cheerleading squad, not the wrestling team." Bobby glanced at Jennifer, who had backed up nearly to the wall. Jennifer flashed Bobby an encouraging smile. "I'm sorry," Kimmy said sullenly, and extended her hand. Bobby took her hand. It felt hot and wet. "I'm sorry, too," she said softly. "That's better," Miss Green said, more than a little relieved. "I'm sure you girls can find a more civilized way to work out your differences." Bobby and Kimmy both nodded. Bobby let go of Kimmy's hand. The two eyed each other warily. Kimmy will never be my friend, Bobby realized. Her next thought, will she always be my enemy? "This new routine is so tricky," Miss Green was saying, "so complicated. The timing is split second. You two girls have to be able to rely on each other. You have to have confidence in each other." She called the other cheerleaders over to begin the practice. Bobby wasn't in the mood to work on anything new. She still felt strange, out of sorts. How could Kimmy have attacked her like that? Didn't she have any pride? Let's try the last part of the routine first, Miss Green suggested. Why don't you explain it again, Bobby? Actually, Corky should explain it, Bobby replied, turning to her sister. Corky invented it? We used it at the state finals last year, and it really got a big reaction? Bobby saw Kimmy mutter something to Deborah. Both girls snickered quietly to themselves. It's easier to demonstrate it, Corky said. Bobby, do a shoulder stand. We'll do this now without the rest of the pyramid. But in the real routine, she'd be up much higher. We'll show you how the pike works. Miss Green, will you catch Bobby when she dives? Bobby and Miss Green obediently moved into place as the other girls watched intently. You'll be doing this pike, Kimmy, Miss Green said, so watch carefully. If you have any questions... I'm watching, Kimmy said sharply. Bobby stepped behind Corky and grabbed Corky's hands. Then she placed one sneaker on Corky's bent knee and, with a boost from Heather, who was standing behind her, raised her other sneaker to Corky's shoulder and pulled herself up until she was standing on Corky's shoulders. Corky brought her hands up to Bobby's ankles, gripping them tightly, locking her in place. Miss Green moved in front of Corky and readied herself to catch Bobby as she dove. Ready, Bobby? Corky asked, keeping her shoulders steady, bracing herself. Here goes, Bobby said. She leapt up off Corky's shoulders, bringing her feet up, folding her body into a perfect V, and dropped in a sitting position right into Miss Green's waiting arms. Some of the girls burst into enthusiastic applause. Excellent, Miss Green cried as Bobby lowered her feet to the floor. You really made it look easy. We've practiced it a lot, Bobby said modestly. Kimmy, are you ready to try it? Miss Green asked. I guess so, Kimmy said reluctantly, eyeing Bobby. Bobby will catch you. Run through it slowly, Miss Green instructed as Kimmy stepped behind Corky. Take as long as it takes. Don't worry about the number of beats. We'll practice the timing later. The girls who were not involved in this part of the routine stepped back to make room. Ronnie was talking excitedly to two of them, shaking her head, glancing at Bobby. I really don't believe this. My life is in your hands, Kimmy told Bobby dryly. No problem, Bobby replied. I haven't dropped anyone in weeks. Kimmy didn't smile at Bobby's joke. Corky braced herself. Kimmy pulled herself up quickly into a standing position on her shoulders. Corky grabbed her calves to brace her. Bobby moved into position to catch Kimmy. I'm ready whenever you are, she called up to her. Shouldn't she go on a diet first? Deborah cracked. Kimmy glared down at her. Since when do you make jokes? Deborah shrugged. Ronnie made me say it. Let's get serious, girls, Miss Green scolded. This stunt could really be dangerous. Corky and I have done it a million times, Bobby reassured her, looking up at Kimmy. Ready? I guess, Kimmy replied with a shrug. Wish I had a safety net. You can do it, Jennifer yelled encouragement from against the wall. Okay, on 3, Corky said. 1, 2. Bobby braced herself, spreading her feet far apart in preparation for the catch. She arched her back and started to raise both arms above her head. 3. Bobby sucked in a mouthful of air. My arms, she thought. What's wrong? What's happening to me? I can't raise my arms, Bobby thought, frozen in horror. I can't move. I can't move anything. She could feel beads of cold sweat run down her forehead. Stop, Bobby thought. You've got to stop this. Hold everything. Please, just stop. But to her horror, she couldn't speak out. She couldn't make a sound. I can't move. I can't speak. She strained to raise her arms, to get into position. No, please no, Bobby cried. Only no sound came out. What is happening to me? She could see herself standing there, as if she had floated out of her own body. She could see herself looking up as Kimmy prepared to dive, looking up with her arms still at her sides, unable to move them, to raise them, unable to catch Kimmy, unable to warn her. No, please, Kimmy, don't dive. Don't dive. Can't you see I'm paralyzed here? Can't you see something is holding me here? Holding me in its grip? Holding me so I can't move a single muscle? Cannot even blink? Can't you see? Corky's shoulders bobbed under Kimmy's weight as Kimmy bent her knees and began her jump. No, no, Kimmy, don't! Kimmy's eyes narrowed, her features tight in intent concentration. Her knees bent, the muscles tightened. No, stop! Kimmy, stop! I can't catch you. I can't even move to break your fall. Kimmy, please! Kimmy took a deep breath, held it, and then she leapt off Corky's shoulders. Chapter 15. Kimmy hit the floor hard. She landed first on her knees and elbows. Everyone heard a sickening crack, and then a heavy thud as her forehead smashed against the floor. Her head snapped back and her mouth let out a whoosh, like air escaping a blown-out tire. And then her eyes closed and she didn't move. At first, no one reacted. Everyone seemed as paralyzed as Bobby. But then Heather's shrill scream pierced the air, echoing off the high gym ceiling. Several other girls cried out. Corky dropped to her knees beside Kimmy's unmoving body and stared up at Bobby. Her eyes locked on Kimmy. Bobby stumbled back. 1 step. 2. She raised her hands to her cheeks. I can move, she realized. I can move again. I'm me again. Jennifer was wheeling her chair frantically toward Kimmy. Miss Green leaned over Kimmy, took her hand, slapped at it. Kimmy groaned. She had the wind knocked out, Miss Green announced. She raised her eyes to the girls huddling around the fallen cheerleader. Quick, call for an ambulance. Call 911. Megan and Heather, pale and shaken, went racing from the gym. I can move now, Bobby thought. But what happened to me? You didn't try to catch her. Deborah's words stung Bobby. Stepping close, Deborah pointed an accusing finger. You didn't even try. No. Bobby didn't know what to say. She took a step back, away from Deborah's accusing finger. You just let her fall, Ronnie cried shrilly. She had tears running down her cheeks. No, Bobby cried. I tried, but... You didn't try, Ronnie screamed. We saw you. We all saw you. You just stood there, Deborah cried angrily. It was deliberate, Ronnie said. She did it deliberately. Corky, still on her knees beside Kimmy, stared up at her sister. What happened? She mouthed the word silently. I couldn't catch her, Bobby explained, knowing how lame her words sounded. My arms? Bobby stopped. It didn't make any sense to her. How could she make it make sense to them? You were mad at her, so you let her fall, Ronnie accused. How could you? Deborah cried. Kimmy stirred and opened her eyes. You had the wind knocked out of you, Miss Green said softly, still holding her hand. Kimmy groaned. Her eyes darted from face to face. My arm, she groaned. Your arm? Miss Green lowered Kimmy's hand to the floor. The other one, Kimmy groaned. I can't move it. I think it's... We heard a crack, Miss Green said. Maybe you broke it. Kimmy tried to raise herself. No. Miss Green pushed her gently back down. Don't try to get up. There's an ambulance on the way. Oh, it hurts. Kimmy stared up at Bobby. You did this to me. On purpose, she said, her voice a pained whisper. No, Bobby protested. You just let me fall, Kimmy accused, wincing from the pain in her arm. Lie back, Miss Green instructed her. You're going to be okay, dear. You're going to be just fine. Don't worry about Bobby now, okay? She glanced up at Bobby, and her expression became hard and cold. Bobby and I will be having a good long talk. Bobby has a lot of explaining to do. I'm sure it was an accident, Corky said, suddenly bursting into the conversation. We've done this dive 1,000,000 times, really. She tried to hurt her, Deborah insisted. I watched the whole thing. It's attempted murder, she heard Ronnie tell Megan, deliberately loud enough for Bobby to hear. Ronnie, you're going too far, Miss Green scolded. We saw her, Ronnie shot back angrily. No, Bobby screamed, tugging at the sides of her hair. No, no, no! She couldn't take any more of this. She couldn't take the eyes, so many eyes, staring at her with so much hatred. She couldn't take the accusing frowns, the pointing fingers. She couldn't take the sting of their words. No, no! And without realizing it, she had turned away from them, away from their eyes, away from their hatred, and now she was running, her sneakers loud against the hard floor, running blindly, her eyes blurred by hot tears, running with her arms outstretched, running to the double doors, and pushing through them, into the coolness of the hallway, out of the heat, away from their eyes, their unforgiving eyes. She turned and ran toward the stairs, past the white-coated paramedics hurrying toward the gym, carrying a stretcher and black bags of equipment, past a surprised group of students gathered in the middle of the hall, up the stairs and out of the building, without stopping for her jacket, without stopping for her books, out into the cold, gray afternoon, her sneakers crunching over dead leaves, hot tears stinging her eyes. She ran as fast as her heart was pounding. She just wanted to run forever. But then 2 hands grabbed her roughly from behind. Bobby gasped and flailed out with both hands. No, don't, she cried. Chapter 16. Bobby, what's wrong? Chip let go of her shoulders and backed away, startled by her wild reaction. "Oh, Chip? I—" The words caught in her throat. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you," he said, his eyes studying her, his expression alarmed. "I saw you running, and—" "Chip, it happens to me too," Bobby blurted out, half talking, half crying. She grabbed the sleeve of his leather jacket, pressed her face against it. "Huh? Where's your coat? Aren't you cold?" "It happens to me too," she repeated, not recognizing her shrill, frightened voice. She straightened up, saw that her tears had run onto his jacket sleeve. I couldn't move?" "You? Really?" Chip stared at her as if he didn't quite know what to make of her words, as if he didn't understand, or didn't believe her. "I'm going to the doctor's, for tests, right now," he said awkwardly. "I was just telling Coach I had to miss practice," he said. "I couldn't move?" Bobby repeated, as if repeating it would make him believe her. "I couldn't raise my arms? Just like you, Chip." She stared into his eyes imploringly. "You should get to a doctor too," he said softly. "Mine thinks it's some kind of muscle thing, these tests." A horn honked loudly, insistently behind them. "Hey, that's my brother. He's taking me to the doctor," Chip said, turning to wave to the driver. "I've got to go." "Can I call you later?" Bobby asked. "I mean, I've really got to talk to you about what happened." "Yeah, sure," he said, jogging to the car. "I'll be home later." He stopped suddenly and turned back to her. "You need a lift." "No," she shook her head. "I want to walk. Thanks." He climbed into the passenger seat. The car sped off. He's the only one who will believe me, Bobby thought, watching the car until it disappeared around the next corner. He's the only one. It happens to him, too. I'm not cracking up. I'm not cracking up, she told Jennifer. It happens to Chip, too? Jennifer's eyes flared for a brief second when Bobby mentioned Chip's name. She wheeled herself back against the wall, giving Bobby room to pass her and enter the den. "Thanks for letting me come over," Bobby said gratefully. She tossed her backpack onto the floor beside a couch and started to pull off her coat. "My parents took my little brother to a Cub Scout dinner, and Corky is babysitting tonight. I just didn't want to be alone." "That was so awful this afternoon," Jennifer said, speaking slowly, cautiously. "You must have felt terrible." She wheeled herself back into the den, banging into the frame of the narrow doorway, backing up and succeeding on the second try. Bobby dropped her coat on top of her backpack and rubbed the sleeves of her blue, long-sleeved pullover to warm herself. "Yeah? I was—" She stopped, unable to describe how she had felt. "So, did you talk to Chip about it?" Jennifer asked. I tried to call him. There was no answer. No one at his house." "Would you like some tea?" Jennifer asked softly. "You look chilled." No, thanks. Maybe later," Bobby said. "Do you believe me, Jen? Do you believe that I didn't deliberately let Kimmy fall?" "I talked to her mother," Jennifer replied, avoiding the question. "She has a broken wrist. It's in a cast, but it's her left hand, so it isn't so bad." "Do you believe me?" Bobby demanded, sitting on the edge of the couch, leaning forward expectantly, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "I really don't know what to believe," Jennifer replied reluctantly. "It was like someone was holding me down, holding me in place, smothering me. My arms were useless," Bobby said, explaining for the 100th time. "Useless! My whole body was useless." "I know what that's like," Jennifer said with sudden bitterness. She stared down at her legs. "Oh, Jen, I'm sorry," Bobby cried, jumping to her feet, feeling her face grow hot. "That was so thoughtless of me. Jennifer gestured for her to sit back down. "You've had a hard day, Bobby, a horrible day." "Do you think Miss Green will let me stay on the squad?" Bobby asked, dropping back onto the couch. Jennifer shrugged. "Do you want to try to study or something? Take your mind off what happened?" Bobby sighed. "I don't know if I can take my mind off it." "Let's try," Jennifer said, tossing her beautiful, wavy hair behind her shoulders. "I'll make us some tea, and we'll try." Jennifer tried valiantly, but she couldn't rouse Bobby from her frightened, unhappy thoughts. No matter what they talked about, Bobby's mind trailed back to the gym, back to her mysterious, terrifying paralysis, back to Kimmy's plunge to the floor. Again and again, Bobby heard the crack of Kimmy's wrist breaking. She heard the thud of Kimmy's forehead hitting the floorboards, saw Kimmy's head snap back and her eyes close. Again and again, She saw the accusing eyes of the other cheerleaders and heard their outraged cries. A little after 11 o'clock, Bobby glumly pulled on her jacket, hoisted her backpack to a shoulder, and headed for the front door. "Thanks for keeping me company," she told Jennifer, and leaned down to give her friend a hug. "Any time," Jennifer replied with a yawn. "Where are your parents?" Bobby asked. "Visiting some friends," Jennifer said sleepily. "They'll probably be home soon." "Well, thanks again," Bobby said, pulling open the front door, feeling the chill of the night air against her hot face. "See you tomorrow, Jen." "Get some sleep," were Jennifer's parting words. She willed herself to the door. Bobby closed the door behind her. She looked out into a dark, starless night. The air was cold and wet. From the driveway, she could see a white covering of frost on her car windshield, reflecting off the streetlight. Shivering, she made her way down the drive, her high tops crunching over the gravel. Crunch, crunch, she thought, like the crunch of bones. When she got down to the car, she rubbed a finger over the frost on the windshield. It wasn't very frozen. She didn't need to scrape it off. The windshield wipers would take care of it. She pulled open the car door. Then, before climbing behind the wheel, she glanced back at the house and gasped. "Whoa!" she exclaimed out loud, her breath steamy white in front of her as she squinted at the large living room picture window. It was the only lighted window in the front of the house. A window shade had been pulled down, covering the entire window. The bright living room lights made the shade bright orange and cast shadows onto it. Moving shadows. Squinting hard, Bobby realized that she was seeing Jennifer's shadow against the shade, and Jennifer was walking, pacing back and forth in front of the window. "Whoa!" Bobby repeated. She blinked several times. But when she reopened her eyes and directed them back to the window, the shadow didn't change or fade away. Jennifer, Bobby knew, was the only one home, and Jennifer was out of her wheelchair. Jennifer was walking. "What's going on?" Bobby asked out loud. "I'm definitely cracking up," she realized. "I've got to get help. I'm seeing things." She took a step up the driveway, then another. Her sneakers slid over the wet gravel. "I'm crazy. Crazy, crazy." But no, as she drew closer to the house, the gray shadow against the orange shade continued to move steadily back and forth. The image drew clearer, sharper. It was Jennifer. She was walking, her hands knotted in front of her. "What's going on?" Bobby wondered, her mind whirring with wild ideas. Is it a miracle? Did Jennifer just this second discover she could walk? No, that wasn't likely. Then, has Jennifer been faking all along? Why? Why would she fake paralysis? Why? Bobby stepped back onto the stoop. She rang the doorbell. She had to know. She had to ask Jennifer what was going on. She leaned toward the door and listened for Jennifer's footsteps. Silence. She rang the bell again. Finally, the front door was pulled open, revealing a widening rectangle of light. "Jennifer!" Bobby cried.